A routine patrol turns into an act of cruelty when a female police officer, drunk on her own authority, decides to teach an old woman a lesson. With a heart cold as iron and a gaze filled with disdain, she makes a brutal decision, one she believes will go unpunished. But some acts of violence are never forgotten, and some debts are collected sooner than expected. What begins as a moment of unchecked power soon unravels into something far more sinister. Because this elderly woman, she is not as helpless as she seems, and when the darkness she once made a deal with takes notice, justice will not come through the law. Don't forget to like and comment where you are from. Chapter 1. A cruel kick that couldn't be undone. The streets were nearly empty, bathed in the dim glow of flickering streetlights. A light drizzle misted over the cracked pavement, turning the night into a ghostly scene where shadows stretched unnaturally long. It was the kind of night where even the stray cats hesitated before stepping onto the cold asphalt. Officer Valerie Morgan stood next to her patrol car, exhaling sharply as she checked her watch. Another mind-numbing shift in this miserable city, another round of dealing with the same nobodies that cluttered the sidewalks like forgotten relics. She was restless, bored. She didn't join the force to babysit the streets. She wanted real action, real authority. And if that meant making sure people remembered who had the power in this city, so be it. Then she saw her. A frail, elderly woman, slowly making her way down the sidewalk, a small, scruffy dog trotting beside her. The woman leaned heavily on a metal cane, her steps slow but deliberate, as if every movement carried weight beyond what the eye could see. Something about her annoyed Valerie instantly. Maybe it was the way she took up space, moving at a snail's pace, like the world owed her patience. Maybe it was the dog, its mangy fur, its ridiculous little trot, as if it had a purpose in a world that had long since abandoned it. Or maybe it was just the way the old woman carried herself, like she wasn't afraid. And Valerie hated that. A warning that went unheard. The rain started to pick up, cold droplets tapping against the metal of Valerie's badge. The woman had stopped near the entrance of a narrow alleyway, fumbling in her pocket as if searching for something. Valerie's lips curled in annoyance. "Move it along, lady," she called out, her voice sharp, cutting through the quiet. The woman barely reacted, only turning her head slightly, her face hidden beneath the heavy folds of her dark hood. "I'm not in anyone's way," the old woman murmured. Her voice was soft, but there was something beneath it, something ancient, something unshaken. Valerie's jaw tightened. She didn't like the way the woman spoke, didn't like the complete lack of fear in her tone. "Public sidewalk?" Valerie shot back, stepping closer. "And I'm telling you to move. You're making people nervous standing around like that." The woman turned fully now, her face illuminated by the dull streetlight, wrinkles carved deep into her skin, eyes dark and unreadable. And then the dog growled, a low rumbling sound, barely audible over the rain. The kick that sealed her fate. Valerie rolled her eyes. "Control your damn mutt." The woman simply looked at her, a slow blink, her fingers curling over the handle of her cane. "He doesn't like you," she murmured. Valerie scoffed, stepping forward. The dog, sensing her approach, bared its teeth, tiny but defiant. And that was all the excuse she needed. Without hesitation, Valerie lifted her boot and kicked. A sharp yelp cut through the air as the small body tumbled across the wet pavement, rolling until it came to a limp stop near the alley's edge. The sound was small. The impact, brief, but the silence that followed was suffocating. The old woman hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. She only stared. And then she smiled, not a smile of sadness, not even anger, a knowing smile, as if she had just been waiting for this moment. Valerie felt a sudden chill snake down her spine, as if the rain had turned to ice against her skin. And then the woman spoke. "You shouldn't have done that. A night that would never end. slowly changing. The old woman took a slow step forward, and in that moment, Valerie understood. She had just kicked something she could never undo, and now it was kicking back. Chapter 2. The First Nightmare. The world felt wrong. Valerie's breath was shallow, her limbs stiff as a foreign sensation slithered through her veins like ice. The rain continued to fall, but it no longer felt like water against her skin. It felt thicker, heavier, like something unseen had wrapped around her body. The old woman hadn't moved. She stood there, her cane gripped loosely in one hand, the other resting by her side, and beside her the small dog. The thing that should have been dead sat still, its dark, unnatural eyes reflecting nothing. "You should go home now," the woman murmured, her voice almost pitying. Valerie wanted to laugh, wanted to spit out some cruel remark, tell the old hag to crawl back into whatever hole she came from. But her throat was dry, and deep down, something in her knew. This woman was right. She needed to leave. Now. A drive filled with shadows. Valerie forced her legs to move, turning sharply on her heel and striding toward her patrol car. Her body still felt strange, but she refused to acknowledge it. This was nothing. Some kind of adrenaline dump, a mix of exhaustion and the cold. That's all. She wrenched open the car door and slid into the driver's seat, slamming it shut behind her. The leather was cold against her skin as she exhaled, fingers gripping the wheel tightly. "Freaks," she muttered under her breath, shaking her head. With a sharp turn of the key, the engine roared to life, the hum of the police radio crackling through the still air. She didn't look back, didn't check the rearview mirror, because she didn't want to see if they were still watching. The road that never ended. The rain had grown heavier now, sheets of water sliding down the windshield, distorting the glow of passing streetlights. The city was too quiet. Valerie's eyes flicked to the clock on the dashboard. 2:34 a.m. The shift was over. She just had to get home. A shower, a stiff drink, a good night's sleep, and she'd forget this ever happened. But as the minutes ticked by, she realized something was wrong. The streets looked the same. She had driven this route 100 times, knew every turn, every building, but somehow every corner she took led her back to the same street, the same flickering neon sign of the closed convenience store, the same cracked pavement with the uneven curb, the same damn alleyway. Her grip Sound of the rain outside gone. Even her own breathing sounded distant, like she had been dropped into a space. Felt empty, but she didn't. She felt full, like something inside her had already eaten for her. And the second she had that thought, a soft scratching came from the doorframe. Valerie snapped her head up, and there it was, sitting just outside her apartment, the dog, staring at her, its mouth stretched too wide, into a grin. The night wasn't over yet. Valerie shot to her feet. She had seen enough. Her gun was still in its holster, her badge still pinned to her hip. She was a cop, not some idiot in a horror movie. This was insanity. She stormed forward, yanking the door shut with a loud slam and locking it tight. She stepped back, breath ragged, hand still gripping the doorknob, and then a voice, right on the other side. "See you soon." Valerie's stomach dropped, because it wasn't a child's voice this time. It wasn't the voice from the radio. It wasn't even a whisper. It was hers. And it was laughing. Chapter 4. The hunger that wasn't her own. The laughter stayed with her, even after the apartment fell silent, even after she double-checked the locks, even after she stumbled into the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face, forcing herself to breathe. That sound lingered, and the worst part, it had been her own voice. A reflection she didn't recognize. Valerie gripped the edges of the sink, knuckles white. She forced herself to look up into the mirror, and what she saw stole the breath from her lungs. Her reflection wasn't right. It was her, but it wasn't. Her skin looked off, paler, almost sickly. Her lips were dry, her eyes sunken, dark circles forming beneath them, like she hadn't slept in days. But the worst part, her mouth. Something about it felt wrong, like it didn't belong to her. She raised a shaking hand, touching her lips, and for a fraction of a second, her reflection didn't move. The first real fear. Valerie staggered back, her heart slammed against her ribs. This was stress, this was exhaustion, this was a nightmare. It had to be. But the moment she turned away from the mirror, a low growl Valerie's mind raced. She had to get out, had to wake up, had to... A knock. Her head snapped up. It came from the other side of the door, loud, slow, rhythmic. She wasn't alone. Someone was outside, someone real, someone who could help. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to move. Her fingers shook as she reached for the doorknob. The dog didn't stop her. But she couldn't. She was rooted in place, paralyzed, helpless. And as the old woman reached out, as her cold fingers brushed against Valerie's cheek, the dog laughed and whispered, "She belongs to me now." Chapter 6. The price of her actions. Valerie couldn't move. She wanted to, needed to, but her body wouldn't obey. The old woman's fingers lingered against her skin, cold, lifeless, not just touching her, draining her. And for the first time, she felt it. A shift, something leaving her. Something being taken. The debt she never knew existed. Valerie's vision not towards her, but towards the door. It sat, waiting, watching, like it knew what came next, like it had seen this before. The price of blood. Valerie's knees buckled. She hit the floor hard. Her body felt weak, drained. The hunger gnawed at her now. The same hunger she had once ignored. She understood now. This wasn't about punishment. This was about equilibrium. She had taken life, and now life was being taken from her. The offer she didn't expect. The old woman finally let go. Valerie collapsed, gasping, shaking, dying. She could feel it. Her heartbeat wasn't right. Her breath was too shallow, her body was failing. But then, the old woman knelt beside her and whispered, "There is one way." Valerie's fingers twitched. She tried to speak, but her voice was gone. The choice she didn't want to make. The old woman's lips barely moved, but the words cut through the silence. "Swear yourself to the pact." Valerie's pulse slowed. Her body was shutting down. The dog stood, stepped closer, and for the first time, she understood. This was never about the old woman. It was about the pact, the thing she had hurt, the thing she had defied, the thing that had already decided her fate. And now, she had only one way out. The night refused to end. The room spun, her vision darkened. The dog's eyes glowed in the dim light, waiting, expecting. She had a choice, but no real freedom. The pact would claim her. The only question was, would she resist? Or would she offer herself willingly? She had seconds. She had one decision. And if she made the wrong one, she wouldn't live to regret it. Chapter 7. The Pact Sealed in Blood. Valerie couldn't speak. Her lungs burned. Her body felt hollow. She was slipping, fading, and yet, the old woman waited. The dog waited. The pact waited. The last choice she would ever make. The hunger was unbearable now. to her leg, and when it spoke, it was not just words. It was truth. "You belong to us now." Her breath hitched, her stomach tightened. She wanted to say no, wanted to fight, wanted to believe this was not real. But it was, because deep inside her, she felt it, the pull, the hunger, the power, and worst of all, the acceptance. The past that erased itself. She turned toward the door. She knew what would happen when she stepped through. She would leave this life behind. Her name, her job, her past, everything that had once been Valerie, and she would step into something else, something darker, something stronger, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. She was ready. The final step. The dog walked ahead. She followed, and as the door creaked open, a wind rushed through, cold, sharp, welcoming, and just before she stepped through, she looked back one last time, at the life that had once been hers, at the version of herself that had once believed in control, in power, in the law, and then she let it go. Because Valerie, she wasn't human anymore. She was something else, and whatever she had become, the world would soon find out. What would you do? Some doors should never be opened. Some choices can never be undone, and some debts are collected long after you've forgotten you owe them. But tell me, if you had the chance for power beyond understanding at a cost you couldn't see, would you take it? Drop a comment below. Let's see who would dare. And if you made it to the end, you know what to do. Hit that like button, because stories like this, they make us question everything we think we know. And if you don't want to miss the next one, subscribe now, because some stories are just the beginning. The content is fictitious and does not reflect reality or encourage negative behavior.